Hi, Angela Wolf here, fashion designer and online instructor. And in this season of It's So Easy, I'm going to be talking all about athleisure wear, leggings, jogging pants, cute tops, something comfortable to wear at home or out. So in this episode, we're going to start with the basics. A simple t-shirt that I do a little bit of pattern hacking to add mesh or lace. And on the back, there's a lot of fun going on there. So I want to show you how I designed the pattern, and I'll give you some tips for sewing knits. So for the front pattern piece, that was pretty simple. I just added 2 little slots. I'll just use a Sharpie here. And I'm just going to give myself a guide there. And let's just make this one at an angle. You can do any design you want there. And if you compare this to that, that's about the same. So the next thing I do is give myself some markings to add. That reminds me to add a seam allowance once I cut this apart. Just going to cut into that. And I can also use those markings as notches. So I will cut this piece out of mesh or lace or something fun like that, and these 2 out of fabric. So let's talk about the back piece. The back piece, if I flip this around just to give you another visual, I have a panel here and a panel here of lace. So up here's the shoulder, which would go from about here. I covered the neckline and then on into the arm's eye. So this looks a little bit like this, and I'm just gonna draw these for you so you can do it at home with whatever pattern you have. Okay, so that's one panel. That will be out of regular fabric. And then I'm gonna make a line all the way down for lace. So it could be on a curve, it could be straight, whatever you really want. And I'm sure you've seen me do this pattern hacking before. It's the same thing, except this time we're adding mesh and lace. Once I get to the bottom, I'm just going to keep that a little straighter. And then I need to give myself a grain line for that piece. Although I really don't, because it's going to be cut on the fold. So again, give myself some markings to know that when I cut this out, I'm going to need to add seam allowances. And now I have one pattern piece, another, and another, and this one is going to be out of lace, cut on the fold. Very easy to do. Now, lace or mesh, it's your choice. I just want to talk just a smidge about that. Mesh will come, and it's usually, well, not always, but it usually has just a little bit of stretch, which is great, a great complement to sew with the knit. So both of these are mesh. This one has a little bit looser weave. Just want to show you the hand of that. So you're going to sew this. You can use a serger, or you'll want to use elastic thread in a regular sewing machine, whatever your choice is. And you can even embroider on it. Pretty fun. So I've already cut out the back, and I just want to give you some tips for sewing this. So here's my side back piece. On this pattern piece, I didn't include the shoulder. I just added some mesh. So I have mesh going to 2 side seams, almost like a princess seam. So I'll just lay this flat so you can see it, and then we'll walk it over to the machine. There's the pattern pieces. We're going to go with right sides together. We're going to stitch this princess seams. And I'm using a 4-thread overlock because it's a little sturdier. You know, it's a top, so you technically could use a 3-thread, but I'm using 4-thread. It's just sturdier, especially when it comes to garments. Oh, let's see. Slippery little guys. All right, here we go. Just get it started. So the trick is this mesh and lace can slide around a lot. So what I like to use is to use my right hand with the bottom fabric and my top hand with, or my left hand with the top fabric. You want to make sure that you're not stretching the fabric. You want to just let the machine take the fabric in. And the stitch looks good. I'm using a contrasting thread so you can see what's going on here. Now, if you're using a serger, you won't need to add a very large seam allowance. You can even just use a 1/4-inch seam allowance. And on down. Now when I cut these out, I actually cut the mesh a little bit shorter because I was going to hem the bottom different. So when I get to the end, it fits crooked. Don't worry, it was when I cut this out for the show. All right, so that's one side. Looks great, and let's just go ahead and do the other side while we're here, because this side we're going to be stitching with the mesh on the bottom. And again, I like to just get it started, and then the machine will capture the fabric. Let's just get it in there. There we go. And again, use your right hand with the bottom fabric and your left hand with the top fabric. And once you start stitching this, you'll see it's very slippery against the machine. And you can see how I use my finger to keep these fabrics apart and making sure that they butt up at the end. And again, my mesh is going to be a little shorter, so. All right, so before we go to the sewing machine, let's go up here. I think you'll see this just a little bit better up here by the iron, because the next thing I do is, knowing that I'm using a white seam allowance, you don't want that to show. So from the wrong side of the fabric, just press your seam allowance towards the fabric that's solid. So if you use lace in the sides, then you'd want to press it the other way. But this will be an easy way to do this. And I'll just press one side. You don't need to watch both. All right, so now from the right side, you cannot see the seam allowance, which looks great. So let's go back to the sewing machine. And now, there are a few different ways. Now on the top that I have up there, I actually use a cover stitch machine to finish the edges. You can also use a decorative stitch. So I have stretch thread in here, and I'm gonna pick a decorative stitch that looks similar to serging. You could actually use any decorative stitch. Because it's a seam that's going up and down, it doesn't need to stretch as much as if it was going sideways. I'm just going to put this down, and all I want to do is to keep this seam in place. So I'm going to show you two stitches on here. Let's make the stitch length a little bit longer, and you'll see the difference here. Now, when you're sewing this knit with mesh, it's kind of a fine fabric. If you have any problems with that fabric getting stuck inside the machine, you can change your needle plate to the one that has a single hole. All right, go a little bit further, just so you can see this. I'll get my hand out of the way. See how nice that looks? Again, I'm using a contrasting thread. Now another option you have is the triple stitch, and that's one that I use quite often for different top stitching. Use the triple stitch. I'm just going to cut this and we'll start over. I know I'm using different stitches on here just to show you. I'll have to rip these out before I wear the top. I'm changing the stitch length to a 3.5, and now we're going to stitch down, and you'll see what this looks like. Again, right on the edge. Let's fold that just a little bit more. All right, can you see that okay? That's the triple stitch. What that does is it's keeping the seam allowance into the regular fabric. So when you wash it a few times, you won't have that twisting all over. All right, now I'm going to switch to one more stitch just to give you another idea, and I'm picking one more decorative stitch. And you know, you could use stretch thread or regular thread on any of these now. And I'll show you when I'm finished that you'll see that all of these stitches will actually stretch, so either's fine. And I'm going to change the stitch length a little bit longer. You just don't want too many stitches to be real close together when you're using a knit, because you'll end up with too many holes in the fabric. And I don't know if I mentioned this, but I'm using a number 11 jersey needle, but you could also use a number, I think it's 11, I'm using a number 12 jersey needle. You could use a number 11 stretch needle, would be just as great. All right. Let's just take this off and let's go compare this. That looks great, a nice little stretch. So let's bring this back up here. And I just want to show you this. I think you can see it better from the table. So there's a decorative stitch. Doesn't that look great? A contrasting thread, I actually kind of like that look. It stretches. Here's the triple stitch. There's another decorative stitch. And if I go back to the shirt, you can barely see it because I used a dark navy. That was with a double cover stitch. All different options to get your seam allowance to go to one way or the other. So that's how simple it is to take a simple t-shirt, add a little touch of lace or mesh.